population, major growth. In 1948, we had fewer than 1 million people living in Israel, and today, everybody remembers, close to 9 million. Okay, and what's interesting is the breakdown of the population. In 48, 82% were Jewish. Today, 74% or so are Jews, and about 21% are Arabs. And the breakdown, of course, within each of these segments of the population is something that's really interesting to look at. If you can see here, the numbers that are, Charedim, this is the ultra-Orthodox, they make up 12% of the population and 16% of the Jewish population. That's the number in the parentheses, is what percent they are of their specific population. So we have about 12% of the population are Charedim, ultra-Orthodox, and about 30% are secular. We also have about 7% of the population that are religious. These are, and when I show you numbers going forward, basically I'll divide the population mostly according to Charedim, okay? The Haredi Jews, these 12%. Then the remaining Jewish population, which what we call for lack of a better word, the non-Haredi Jewish population. Even though there's some diversity within that population, in terms of education and in terms of their engagement in the labor market, they act pretty similarly. Okay, so that's part of why we group them all together. But there are cases where there's some major differences, and I'll show those as well. Among the Arab population, we have, among the total population, about 17% are Muslim, 2% Christian, and then within the Muslim population, there's also a breakdown of various different groups. I think it's also, I still need to change this graph to be in English. I apologize. I only remember that every time I show this graph. So I think it's really important also to think to take note of differences in the geographic spread of the population. So these numbers that you see here in red are of the entire population. How does the population break down geographically in terms of where they're located? Okay, so you can see a relatively small percentage of the entire population lives in the north, about 14%. Within Tel Aviv, about 16% of the population lives just in this little red area of Tel Aviv. Almost 25% of the population lives in the center. 12, almost 13% of the population in Jerusalem. Okay, so this is when we're looking at the general population. But the next numbers I'm going to show you are the breakdown of the Arab population in Israel. Okay, and this is really interesting. If you look, for example, in Tel Aviv, 1% of the Arab population lives in Tel Aviv, whereas, and that's the center, that's the hub of high tech in Israel. That's the hub of the booming economy in Israel. And 43% of the Arab population lives in the north. So I'll explain why this is important as we go. You could probably already start to guess why it really makes a difference.
Isn't there a major shift going down to where the 16.2% is? The area of Beersheba and the southern, down in the Negev?
Right, so now why am I spending so much time talking about demography? Because there are a lot of differences among the different segments of the population when it comes to some really, really important things. So for example, if we look at the median age of the population among non-Haredi Jews, among Haredi Jews, and among Arab Israelis, we see some major differences. The median age of Haredi Jews is 16. Percentage of the population under the age of 18, 58% of Haredim are under the age of 18, versus less than 29% of the non-Haredi Jewish population. Percent of married individuals age 20 and over, among the Haredim, they look very different than the rest of the population. Average size of the household is also, very, very big difference, and this is just average, okay? So averages can obviously be very deceiving. And then the fertility rate, of course, big differences here. What's very interesting, and I'll show you this in a minute, is the major drop in the fertility rate among the Arab population, which is now very close to the overall fertility. The overall fertility rate in Israel is 3.08, and among the Arab population it's 3.1. Non-Haredi Jews 2.7. And obviously for the Haredi Jews, it was about 7, went down to 6 over a number of years, and now is back up to just about 7 children per woman of childbearing age. So how do we look in Israel as compared to other countries? Well, a lot of countries are struggling. We actually have a lot of visitors who come to us to talk about demographic issues in the other direction, because they don't have even replacement. They don't have the replacement rate in terms of having the number of children. They have fewer than 2.1 children. So that's the vast majority of the world is having fewer. The fertility rate is lower than 2. Lower than 2. In the developed world, lower than 2 children per woman of childbearing age. And in Israel, we're all the way up at 3. And what's really interesting is the drop over time. So if you see here, this is for total fertility rate for Muslim women in Israel. It was in 1960 at 9, and it's now dropped to, it basically converged with the Jewish population. It's still higher than the Christian population, but it's converged with the Jewish population. What's really interesting also, I don't have graphs in here to show it, but there's a book out here for people who want to take it. You're welcome to take it with you, and if there aren't enough, leave your address and I'm happy to send to you. We have a lot more detail about some of the interesting demography in Israel, because Israel is very interesting, particularly the Jewish population in Israel is interesting, because in most countries, as you increase in education level and as you increase in income level, people have fewer and fewer children, and that's not true of the Jewish population in Israel. The Jewish population, only in Israel, it is true of the Jewish population in the rest of the world, but in Israel, among the Jewish population, the non-Haredi Jewish population, people are still having a higher number of children. There's no difference based on economic background or based on education level. Okay, and so this has implications also in terms of, I showed you numbers, how numbers look for the current population, but it has implications for the future as well, because if we look at the number of children, then we can see here, we can see the breakdown of the student population and how this has changed over time. So, you can see that in 1960, 60% of the students in grades 1 through 12 were in the, essentially we call it the Hebrew state education system. That's essentially the secular education system. Secular is not really the right word, because they still have Jewish studies within that system, but it's not as extensive as the Jewish studies that are in the state religious system, which is this one up here, 24%. Then we have the Haredi system and the Arab system. And basically what we see is that the numbers in the state and the state religious system are shrinking over time, and the numbers in the Haredi and the Arab system are really growing over time. And the question is, what is the quality of education in the Haredi education system and in the Arab education system in Israel? Now, I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about the quality of education and where it's going within the Arab education system, because this is a segment of the population that is really interested in development, in economic development, in growth. Within the Haredi population, you have a few pockets now of families who are really interested in getting an education that is both, a strong Jewish education, and also a strong, secular education. But at the moment, the vast majority of students in the Haredi education system do not study math, English. Girls do more than boys. But you know, boys don't really get math beyond 5th grade. Really not very much English at all. And their focus is really primarily on religious studies. And for this reason, you'll see also that within the Haredi population, when I speak a little bit about employment, within the Haredi population, the women are doing most of the working, and the men are doing much less. Okay, so I want to pause for a minute on kind of the demographic issues. And I'll get back to the education system very soon. But I want to take a short pause to talk a little bit about, whoops, oh no, I just ruined my punchline. So I want to take a pause for 1 minute just to talk about economic growth, okay? And where Israel is in terms of its economic growth. So this graph, which can be a little confusing, so let me explain it to you, is where Israel and all these other countries are, in terms of their economic growth as a percentage of the, or their GDP as a percentage of the GDP of the United States, okay? So the United States is basically 100, okay? You can see there. There's the US at 100. And there are 2 countries in 1996 whose GDP, gross domestic product per capita, okay, so divided by the full population, the value of everything they produce divided by the number of people living there. There were 2 countries who had higher GDPs per capita than the US, and all of these countries had lower. And Israel's GDP per capita was 59% of what the US was.
Does that include babies and children also?
Of the entire population.
So obviously with a higher birth rate in Israel, that diminishes the relation to percentage.
Exactly. So if we want to keep up, then we have to produce more. Yeah.
Or less.
Well, it's just,
Produce more. Yes. Reproduce less. I won't comment on how good, some people think that it's great to have a lot of children, so I won't comment on that, But given where we are demographically and the number of children that we have, if we want to keep up in terms of our economic growth, then we do need to be a more productive country in terms of our economics. So my question to you is, where do you think, this is where we were in 1996, we were at 59% of the US's GDP. Where do you think we were in 2016? Did anybody see? Okay, ruined my punchline, but there we go. So we didn't go very far. We increased by 2 percentage points. We had a lot of other countries who really gained on us. For example, Estonia had about 30% of the U.S.'s GDP, and by 2016 they went up to about 50%. So the question is there anything that we can do as a country, given where we are in terms of having these segments of the population? 12% of the country today is Haredim, but 18% of the students in the education system are Haredim, and they're not really fully engaged. The level of education and the level of involvement in the workforce among Arabs is relatively low, which I'll show you. So is there anything that we can do as a country to really increase our economic growth, or are we kind of stuck where we are? And what I'm going to tell you is that I think there is a lot that we can do, but it might not be. It might be a little bit different than what you expected. So I want to take a few minutes to talk about poverty in Israel and where we are in terms of our poverty. So first of all, if we look at poverty before the market income poverty, this is poverty before any sorts of interventions, before taxes, and before transfer payments, then Israel actually has a relatively low poverty rate compared to a lot of other countries, okay? 23% before any taxes and transfers. Then, based on disposable income, this is after taxes and transfers, after people get any sort of welfare payments that they get, and after people pay taxes, then you have many countries who have reduced the poverty rate pretty substantially. The OECD average was 28% based on market income, and goes down to 11% after any sorts of taxes and transfers. Israel, unfortunately, does not do as good of a job as other countries in reducing poverty. So the poverty rate goes down from 23% to 18% after government intervention. Okay, so there have been some commissions that have been created for the goal of reducing poverty to the OECD level. There have been some positive steps, but not really enough in this sense. Poverty, just to give you a sense, the poverty line in Israel today is the equivalent of about, for an individual, it's just under $1,000 a month, income of about $1,000 a month. For a couple, it's income of about $1,500 a month. And for a family of 5, it's an income of about $2,800 a month, something like that. Okay? Yes?
Across the OECD, is there a fairly standardized definition of
So
poverty?
in all of these countries, except for in the US, there's a relative poverty line. Okay, so it's considered to be, as in Israel, below half of the median income. In the US is the country that has an absolute poverty level that's defined by a basket of goods. And as far as I know, except for the US, everybody else operates according to a relative poverty rate. So it's also really important to know that poverty does not affect the population in an equal way, okay? And this is where we delve a little bit into inequality as well. So if we look at different segments of the population in Israel, among Jews, about 13% are living under the poverty line. Among Arabs, about 50% are living under the poverty line. Among ultra-Orthodox, it's about 45%. There are also big differences if we look at how many children are in the family. 50% of families that have more than 4 children are living under the poverty line. 70% of the families that have a working age head of household who isn't employed are under the poverty line, and almost 14% with a head of household who is employed are also living under the poverty line, so essentially working poor.
Susie?
Yes?
Quick question on your last slide. Do those figures include the government subsidies or not?
These?
Yeah, those.
Yes, these include the government subsidies.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
How much now, Susie, does a family get for each child every month? The Tikva, right? That's what it's called now. How much money is that now?
They changed it, so it's not the exact same amount for every child that you have. This is for every family, regardless of your regardless. Yeah. So for the first child, it's about 160 shekels a month. For the second child, it's somewhere around there. For the third child, it's a little less than that. They were changed back in 2003 to kind of disincentivize having too many children, which was a big change in policy. So there is an incentive to have children, but not too many. So you don't get the same amount for every child.
It's less than the United States gives per child.
Yeah. 160 shekels per month.
$50 a month,
Per
which is
child.
$2,000 a year.
Yeah. Interesting.
Child tax credit.
So there's some serious, we have some serious challenges in Israel, both in terms of poverty and in terms of inequality. And so I want to talk a little bit about the different ways that typically, governments think about reducing poverty and inequality, and how Israel has done and is doing in those areas. So first of all, in terms of education, okay, we've seen major increases in terms of enrollment in high school for 14 to 17-year-olds, even since 1990. Okay, so if we just focus here on the total numbers, if in 1990 63% of students enrolled in Arab education. And I should say, I just want to explain the terminology for a second. This is not, there can be students who are Arab who are enrolled in Hebrew education, okay? And there can be students, it's much fewer, but there can be students who are Jewish who are enrolled in Arab education. But this is, the breakdown is basically based on the language that the school teaches in, okay? So there are certainly Arab students who go to schools, primarily to Hebrew state schools. Okay, so in any case, the growth, basically by 2015, we're seeing that the vast majority of eligible students are actually studying, enrolled in high school. So that's a very good increase, where we saw in 1990 that there was a huge difference between the enrollment in Arab education and in Hebrew education. We also see, if we look at standardized testing in Israel, we also see major improvements within the within the entire population, but the improvement is steeper within the Arab population in terms of their improvement and the score improvement across the population in all of these areas. So these, I'm showing you here numbers for English, math, and science. And you can see that all the yellow lines are steeper there. Now also in terms of the high technology studies, okay, the types of science and engineering, computer science, these types of classes that would prepare students to go into the field of high tech ultimately. We've seen major growth here in most of the population. Okay, so these kind of purple squares are what the numbers were in 2016. And then in 2017, these are the yellow bars are for the girls and the blue bars are for the boys. And we see really interesting differences here. First of all, the Haredim, it's really important to note that their numbers have actually gone down for their enrollment in the kind of high technological areas. And that the numbers have gone up for everybody else, but not in the same way. Among the Jewish population, we have much higher increases among the boys in terms of the degree to which they're studying high technological studies. And within the Arab population, we have major increases among the girls in particular. And I'll speak about that again in a second. One thing that I want to point out that is really quite troubling is even there's a much lower percentage of students in the religious Jewish education system of girls who are studying high technological studies. This is not what we were expecting to find. In particular, we thought that this would be a really interesting way to look at because in the religious Jewish education system, not the Haredi system, but the religious Jewish education system, in high school there's a division between boys and girls. They study separately. And I studied at Barnard. I have a fellow Barnard alumna in the audience. And so, there have been a lot of studies that show that internationally that girls do better studying in a single-sex environment, and we thought that this might be an interesting way to study this. Now, what we ended up finding here is that in the religious schools, only 18% of the religious girls' schools actually offered studies in this high-tech area, versus 48% of all the other schools. So part of the reason that they're not studying is because it's not being offered to them. And part of the reason that it's not being offered to them is perhaps because the schools are much smaller and they don't have enough demand for those studies, and so they're not doing it. But it's a very interesting, piece of research because there is potential for a policy intervention there, where you could potentially say, okay, let's bring together girls from a number of different schools and give them this opportunity. At the moment, they don't have the opportunity, which means that ultimately they won't really be able to get into high tech, and we have a wage gap in Israel, and it starts early. This is the share of girls who are studying these various sciences out of all the students studying those sciences in high school. The blue bars are the girls in the Hebrew language schools, and the yellow bars are the girls in the Arab language schools, okay? And so you can see here the students studying computer science, okay, among the Jewish girls, of all the students studying among the Jewish population, among all the students studying computer science, 28% are girls, and among the Arab population, of all the students studying science, 56% are girls. So across all of these subjects, the majority of students in the Arab population studying these subjects are girls. And
so they do better economically, the Arabs in general.
So I'll show you that the employment rate among Arab women has increased drastically in recent years. And this is from 2016. Okay, this is, I think, a relatively new trend because in universities, the Arab women are studying a large, vast, not majority, but close to majority of them are studying education. And education is not, important, but we don't need more teachers than we can handle, and it's not a particularly lucrative profession in Israel. But this is exactly what I want to talk about, because this is where the potential is within the Israeli population for our future economic growth. Because all of these girls are studying subjects that position them to be highly engaged in the high-tech sector. And so we need, as a country, and this is something that the government is very, very highly focused on, regardless of political party, regardless, everybody understands that the hope for growth, for the growth of the country is actually through reduction of inequality and through improvement of the employment opportunities, education and employment opportunities, particularly for the Arab population. So it's very different. We talked to, I met with a member of Knesset named Aida Tuma Suleiman, who is a member of the, she was a member of the Joint Arab List, and now they've split up in this new government, so she's a member of the Ram Tal party. But she's the first Arab member of Knesset, not just the first Arab woman, but the first Arab member of Knesset to serve as the chair of a Knesset committee. And she's the chair of the Committee for the Advancement of Women. And so we sat and we talked to her about this. And she said basically the reason why the Arab girls are going into, there are a few reasons, but the reason why they're going into these STEM subjects in such large numbers is A, because they don't have a lot of other choice, that these are the types of subjects that are being offered to them, and that they would love to have the diversity of offerings that the Jewish girls have. Because if I didn't include this slide, but the Jewish girls are 80% of the students studying theater and art and all of these subjects, and the Arab girls don't have the same kind of offering. And this is a situation where the lack of choice is actually probably better for them in the long term economically. You can opine about whether or not that's the right thing for them as individuals. And this is really a ticket out. Studying these subjects and being able, people understand that this is a ticket for their own economic development. The question is why the Arab boys are not studying these subjects in larger numbers. So I'm going to take just a couple of slides to tell you about higher education, and then I'll talk about employment and a couple of other things, and then we'll wrap up and have time for questions. So we talked about education. So that's one kind of way to ultimately, prepare people to be able to get out of poverty and to reduce inequality as a country. Another tool is higher education as the next step. So what you can see here is that across the board there are more women than men enrolled in higher education. This is not unique to Israel. This is generally true across the board. And but there are very, very big differences in the two segments of the population that we've spent a lot of time talking about. The Arab Israeli population, double the number of women, percentage of women as to percentage of men in higher education. And among the Haredi population, only 8% of men are enrolled in higher education. But there's been some growth in that area over the last few years, and it's still relatively low. But the news gets worse in that sense, because even though, and this is a complex graph, so I'm just going to focus you on one area that's not here. Even though they're enrolled in higher education, the men, if you look at this last bar here, 20% of the Haredi men who are enrolled in higher education drop out in their kind of pre-college preparatory year, and another close to 40% drop out at some point over the course of their degree. And only 42% of the men complete their degree, versus among women, among Haredi women, 67% complete their degree. Why? Well, I told you earlier that the Haredi men in particular don't really have the tools as they're studying in their K through 12 education, let's say, to succeed in higher education, because they're not getting a lot of the basic skills that these other students are getting. They also don't take the psychometric exam, generally speaking, and they're admitted, even though the psychometric is basically the SAT, Israel's version of the SAT, so they don't take that exam and they're admitted. So a lot of people are being admitted even though they're not truly prepared, and so they don't really have the tools to succeed. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but as I just said, this is looking at women. Even among the Jewish women, as compared to men, which I don't have on here, a large percentage of them study education, but among the Muslims and the Bedouin women in particular, a very, very large percentage are studying education. It's an important subject. The reason that most of them, I think, are focusing on education relates back to the slide that I showed you with the map. And the geography. They're located far away from kind of industrial centers. And what do you have everywhere? You have schools everywhere, and you have more and more people who are, Arabs in particular, who are studying medicine and pharmacy. And those are also things that where you don't really have, you have them everywhere. You need them all over the country. So you don't have the same spatial challenges as you do in other subjects. And so that's one of the reasons why people are focusing on these areas. So if we look at employment rates, okay, and this is getting back to your question, okay, we've seen since 1995, the employment rate for Arab Israeli women has doubled, okay, and it's reaching the target that was set by the government of having 40% of Arab Israeli women employed by 2020. We're getting there. We're very, very close to getting there. If you look at the Haredi men, okay, this is this gray line. The target for 2020 was set at 60%, and we're very, very far below that number. Okay, it's gone down even, and we're below 50% in terms of employment of Haredi men. Among the women, the Jewish population, the Jewish women in Israel have much, much higher employment rates than the rest of the OECD. Most women in Israel are working, and most Jewish women in Israel are working, even among Haredi women. They're the ones who primarily support the families, and their employment rates are very, very high. Arab men are working at very high employment rates. They have very high employment rates, but they're working, a large percentage of them work in very physically taxing jobs, construction and things like that. And so, but in their, when they reach age 50 plus, the employment rates start to go down because there's only so long that you can do that physically taxing labor. Now, I think it's really interesting.
Yeah. Go back for a minute.
Please.
Yeah. So the Arab women are much less employed than the Arab men. Is that what I said that way?
But they're employed in higher skilled labor, generally speaking. That you can't see here, but yes. So they're much less employed than the Arab men. If you were to ask Israelis, what are the two targeted challenges in terms of the labor market, they would say Haredi men and Arab Israeli women. Those are the two segments of the population that are really underemployed.
So the Haredi women are much more employed than the Haredi men.
Oh, yeah. Much.
And so they have to work all day and then go home and work all night. Just like it used to be here, sort of.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that the men, many of the men who don't work, and some of the men who work, presumably also, they study, and they also spend time taking care of the children. I mean, it's not rare to see a father walking with a number of children, but their wives are working.
But the Arab women apparently are staying home and taking care of the families.
Yeah.
And the Haredi women have more kids. I mean, there's a real, it's an interesting situation.
So they're partially Arab women, some of them are staying home and taking care of families.
Right.
Some of them are not able to get jobs.
Not able to get jobs.
Yeah, some of them are educated and unable to get jobs. Few. And some of them don't study. I mean, I'll show you this graph here. I think is really interesting because once they have a higher education, even if they studied, the employment rates shoot up very, very drastically. So if we look at Haredi men, as I just said, these two target populations, among those who hold a degree, 76% of them are employed. Among Arab Israeli women, among those who hold a degree, 87% of them are employed. Even if they studied and dropped out, the employment rates are much higher. If they never went to university, among Arab Israeli women, the employment rate is about 33%, and among men, the employment rate is about 37%. So the question is, what is the breakdown of the population? How many are actually going to study in university? Because once they do, their likelihood of being employed is much higher. I don't have the graph in here, but it also has an impact on what kind of wages people earn. Yeah?
In Israel, is there such a thing as a 2-year degree, and is that included, or is this all 4-year university?
So these are it's a 3-year degree. There is vocational training, absolutely. And there's, I didn't bring our big book, but it's all available online, and we have a big study in there this year about vocational education, because the nature of vocational education in Israel has actually changed drastically in recent years, where what I showed you about high technological studies, that was actually once considered within the vocational track, and it's still technically in the vocational track, but this is a track that leads people into higher education, whereas the low technology, there's low, medium, and high as we've classified it, and the low technology is more of what you would consider standard vocational education.
But these numbers are the equivalent of a bachelor's.
University, yeah, equivalent of a bachelor's degree.
Is there wage discrimination between men and women in Israel, like there is here in the States?
Yeah, so the overall wage gap in Israel, not considering number of work hours, is about 30%. Yeah. And if you consider the number of hours worked, so the hourly wage gap is about 16%. And the main reason for the wage gap in Israel, we've actually just studied this last year, and we basically broke it apart to try to understand where the wage gap in Israel was coming from. And it really is, aside from the number of work hours, so we already reduced from 30% to 16% when we looked at the hourly wage gap, but it's primarily coming from what areas men and women work in. So it's not people working in the same fields and men earning more than women for the exact same job. It's women tending to work more in lower paid jobs I'll just say that where people live matters in the sense of the degree to which women in particular, and the degree to which they're employed for Arab women and for Haredi men. As they are in more mixed localities, they're more employed. When they're in less mixed localities, there are fewer of them who are employed. In terms of high-tech employment, the vast majority of people who are employed in the high-tech sector are Jewish men, non-Haredi Jewish men. Very, very, very low, much lower numbers of women, low numbers of Arab Israeli women, and Haredi women, and Arab Israeli men, and Haredi men in the high-tech sector. Okay, which is again the very high productive, high wage segment of the economy. The wages in the high-tech sector, as I said, are 2.5 times the wages in the rest of the business sector in Israel. And there are a lot of questions about, a lot of the work that the government is doing is trying to get more and more workers today from the Arab population and from the Haredi population engaged in the high-tech sector. And the question is, are there workers who actually have the skills that are necessary? So using just one example, using just English as a proxy, we see that people who work in the high-tech sector, this is all self-reported data, 61% of them report that they have very, very, very good English. 24% report that they have good English, okay? Only, a much smaller, like 15% report that they have weak or no English or even average English in the high-tech sector in Israel. Okay, then if we look at non-Haredi Jews, the numbers are good, but still not anywhere near the people who are actually employed in the high-tech sector. 31% of them report very good English and 31% good English. Then if we look at Haredi, okay, the percentage who report having very good or good English are much, much lower. The majority of them report having weak or no English. And among the Arab population, the numbers are also not particularly good. Okay, now it's important to note that we're talking about people ages 25 to 44. So these are people who are currently working. And that's why, a lot of when we're talking about this, a lot of what we focus on is the younger, is within focusing on the education system, because people who are already working today, a lot of them don't have what they need, the skills that are necessary, English being one example, to actually work in the high-tech sector. Okay, two last things I want to talk about. For Natan, cost of living. Why are wages important? Okay, because cost of living in Israel is very high. You're not going to see Israel on this graph because Israel is actually this 0%, and this whole graph is comparing other countries to Israel. Okay, and we're saying what is the percent difference between price levels in OECD and in Israel. So based on per capita income, there are two countries that are more expensive than Israel, okay? Chile and Latvia are the two countries that are more expensive than Israel based on per capita income. All of these other countries are less expensive than Israel based on per capita income. You see, if you look at your own country, the US, 40% less expensive than Israel, okay?
I mean, so the U.S. has the lowest cost of living in the OECD, according to this.
Yes.
Our money goes a lot further than any of those other places, right?
Exactly. So this is a challenge, and so this is the increase in the consumer price index in Israel from 2000 to 2014. And you can see that in certain areas, it's gone up much more. For example, food, yes, has gone up by 53%, okay, since 2000. And we have other areas that have actually gone down, like furniture, household goods, and clothing and footwear, primarily because of regulation, that for increased competition in those areas. which means when you want to, you can, okay? When you want to reduce prices, if the government did want to reduce prices, it could by improving competition, changing regulation to improve competition. There is a lot of protectionism, in particular in the food industry. And why is that important? Well, people don't make a lot of money, particularly the poor population who lives on a low income, and to afford what would be considered a healthy food basket in Israel. The highest income quintile, so the highest 20% of the population by income, they would have to spend, on a monthly basis, they would have to spend 7.2% of their income in order to be able to afford a healthy food basket. In practice, they spend 10% of their income. We don't know if they actually spend it on healthy food, but they could, okay? And among the lowest 20% of the population by income, they would need to spend 65% of their monthly income in order to afford a healthy food basket, and they actually spend 42% of their income on food. So they can't afford to purchase a healthy food basket. We don't know what they actually spend it on, but we know how much they spend. So it's very troubling. I'm skipping through that one. And I just want to end here. So I talked about education, I talked about higher education, I talked about employment, and where we are, what our challenges are in terms of cost of living and affordability and poverty. But what we're discovering now, and a lot of people have discovered this, but we're particularly looking at it in Israel, is the education system potentially too late of a stage to reduce inequality in Israel? And do we need to be looking much, much earlier? Education in Israel starts at age 3, but we know that already at age 22 months, there are major gaps in cognitive abilities that you can see on the basis of income level, of socio-economic status. And this is not specific to Israel. This is general. This is from a study in England, I believe. Okay, and then over time, by the time a kid reaches age 10, these gaps have only increased. They only increase in terms of cognitive ability. We're doing a study now that hasn't been published yet, so don't quote me on it yet. We don't have the final numbers. But basically, we're looking at children living in poverty in Israel and in comparison to children not living in poverty in Israel, and looking at their academic achievements in 5th grade, in 8th grade, and in high school. And you can see that there are major gaps based on whether or not they were living in poverty between the ages of birth and 2 years old. There are even differences between birth and 2 years old and between 3 and 5 years old. And so we're basically we've started a whole, an additional study area in early childhood, because we think that the government needs to focus much more on this stage as a source of reducing poverty and inequality in Israel. So, and I should say, these are the numbers from 2016. Today, actually, children aged 0 to 17, about 30% of them are living under the poverty line. So, I think we have a lot of, we have some major challenges in Israel. We also have some major potential. And in particular, there's a lot of potential, as I showed you, within the Arab-Israeli population, particularly among the women today. That potential exists among the men as well, depending on where the studies are focused. And also, I think within the Haredi population, and if we want to grow substantially as a country in terms of our economic growth and development, and have the potential to have people be able to afford our high prices, then we really need to focus not on reducing inequality in Israel because it's the right thing to do, but also on reducing inequality in Israel because it's the economically right thing for the country to do. So I'm happy to answer any questions. Two things that I should have said at the beginning that I didn't say is that the Taub Center is a nonpartisan, apolitical organization. So the research is purely quantitative research, and we don't lean in any direction. We meet with people from across the political spectrum, and we have no agenda other than to have people use data and use numbers as they're making policy. And for that reason, we also don't take any money from the government because we don't want to be, swayed in one direction or another. So thank you very much.